Everyone, I am Marie Antoinette Nyare from BSed Science 2. And before we proceed to our next topic, which is the types of violence, let's have first our trigger question. So, our trigger question is, in what ways can violence extend beyond physical harm, and why is it important to recognize all its forms in building a peaceful and just society? So, here is our answer. Violence includes not only physical harm but also sexual, emotional, economic, structural, and self-directed forms that impact mental health, dignity, and freedom. Recognizing all these types is essential to create a truly peaceful and just society. So now, let's proceed to our formal discussion about our topic, the types of violence. What is violence? So, please read everyone, what is violence? Okay, thank you. Violence is described as the use of physical force or power, whether threatened or actual, that result in or is likely to result in harm. So this harm may include injury, death, and psychological damage. So this definition captures both direct violence like hitting someone and threats that could psychologically impact a person. Who is Betty Riordan? So Betty Riordan, a pioneer in peace education, expanded the definition of violence to include humanly inflicted harm. So Betty Riordan, she stressed that violence is not just physical, it also includes structural and cultural forms. Structural violence, social structures, for example, laws or systems that disadvantage certain groups, like for example, poverty, lack of access to education, like that. In cultural violence, cultural norms that justify or normalize inequality and harm, for example, racism and sexism. These forms cause a long-term harm to individuals and societies, sometimes invisibly or systematically. So there are 6 types of violence. So first we have physical violence, second sexual violence, third psychological or emotional violence, fourth economic or financial violence, fifth cultural or structural violence, and the last one self-directed violence. So now let's proceed to the first type of violence, which is the physical violence. So please read everyone. Okay, thank you. So physical violence, the intentional use of physical force with the potential to cause injury, death, disability, or even harm. So this is the most visible and recognizable type of violence. It includes actions where someone uses their body or an object to cause harm to another person. It can happen in public, private, and or domestic settings. So here in our example, so kind of look at the pictures. So we have here the punching, the slapping, the kicking, the choking. So common in fights or abuse cases. So using weapons like knives, guns, or blunt objects to harm or threaten. So domestic abuse, when a partner physically attacks another in a relationship. So there are impacts, so it can cause both short-term injuries like bruises and fractures, and long-term effects like disability, trauma, fear, and even PTSD. So now let's proceed to the second types of violence, which is the sexual violence. So please read everyone, what is sexual violence? Okay, thank you. So sexual violence, any sexual act or attempt to obtain a sexual act by force without consent, or when the person is unable to give a consent. So sexual violence is not about desire. It is about power and control. It violates the victim's autonomy and causes deep emotion and physical trauma. So here, gonna look at the picture. So these are the example of sexual violence. So like rape or attempted rape for sexual intercourse, child sexual abuse, so any sexual act directed towards a child, coercion, pressuring someone into sexual activity that they don't want, sexual harassment, unwanted sexual comments or touching at school, at work, or even in other places that sexual harassment happens. So there are impact. So often causes severe psychological trauma and long-term mental health issues and physical injury. So now let's proceed to the third type of violence, which is the psychological or emotional violence. So please read everyone, what is psychological or emotional violence? Okay, thank you. So psychological or emotional violence, these are actions or words intended to damage a person's mental well-being, dignity, or emotional stability. So this type of violence can be subtle but deeply damaging. It often happens in toxic relationships or environments where one person tries to dominate or break down another emotionally. So here, can I look at the picture? So these are the example of psychological or emotional violence. So for example, insult, constant criticism, or verbal humiliation, threatening harm to manipulate or control behavior, gaslighting, making someone question about their reality, isolation, cutting off a person from social contact or support. So there are impacts. So the impact can result in depression, anxiety, loss of self-worth, and psychological trauma that may last for years. And now let's proceed to the fourth types of violence, which is the economic or financial violence. So please read everyone, what is the economic or financial violence? Okay, thank you. So, economic or financial violence, when someone controls another person's access to financial resources to dominate or limit their independence. So, this often happens in domestic abuse situations where one partner restricts the other financial freedom, making it harder for them to leave the relationship or make independent choices. So here, kind of look at the picture. So these are the example of economic or financial violence. So preventing someone from getting a job or keeping their earnings, taking someone's money without permission, forcing someone to justify every expense or live with no financial privacy. So there are impacts. So the impact can lead to dependency, powerlessness, and limits access to education, healthcare, and even safety. And now let's proceed to the fifth type of violence, which is the cultural or structural violence. So please read everyone, what is cultural or structural violence? Okay, thank you. So Cultural or structural violence, violence embedded in social systems, traditions, or policies that harm or exclude certain groups. So this type of violence is not always direct. It's often built into the structure of society. It allows inequality, discrimination, and suffering to persist without obvious physical conflict. So here, kindly look at the picture. These are the example of cultural or structural violence. So, for example, no, laws that prevent women or minorities from owning land or voting. Same siya sa suffrage movement, right? Female genital mutilation, FGM, justified culturally but causes a lasting harm. And poverty traps created by systemic racism, caste system, or economic inequality. So there are impacts. So the impact is the structural violence can keep generations of people disadvantaged, and it often leads to physical and psychological violence. So now let's proceed to the last type of physical violence, which is the self-directed violence. So please read everyone, what is the self-directed violence? Okay, thank you. So self-directed violence, violence that a person inflicts on themselves, either intentionally or as a result of mental distress. So this often stems from deep emotional pain, trauma, or mental health disorders. It reflects a person's struggles with internalized harm, guilt, or helplessness. Look at the picture. So these are the example of self-directed violence. So, for example, suicide, the most extreme form ending of one's own life. Self-harm like cutting, burning, or hitting oneself to cope with emotional pain, and also eating disorders. In some cases, this involve harmful behavior towards one's own body. So there are impacts, a lot of impacts. So including, it often indicates a severe psychological suffering and requires urgent care and support. So conclusion. So please read everyone. Okay, thank you. So conclusions or the final thoughts about our topic, the types of violence. So each type of violence, whether visible or invisible, personal or systemic, deeply affects human well-being. Recognizing all forms helps build a world where peace is more than just no war. It becomes about freedom, fairness, safety, and dignity for everyone. And that's all for our topic, the types of violence. And I hope you've learned something. Thank you. And once again, I am Marie Antoinette Niare. Thank you everyone for listening and watching.